This is Stephanie Phillips for Farm and Country, and I'm here today with Diana Weiner, who is the Horticulture Coordinator for Sullivan Renaissance.
Yes, I work for Sullivan Renaissance, and we're located in Ferndale.
What's your background?
Well, I have a degree in agronomy from SUNY Cobleskill, all you Cobleskill alumni out there. After college, I actually got a job running a flower shop in the Bronx, which was great fun. Busy corner with buses and elevated subway above, so you had to talk and sell fast. After that, I went to work for a technical lawn service, Tech Turf, out of Madison, New Jersey, spraying lawns in Tuxedo Park. After that, I got a job in an interior plantscaping company in Harlem, and I was taking care of interior plants all over New York City. I worked for John Minnie Indoor Landscapes. I then moved out to Chicago, had a family, moved back, and got a job with Cornell Cooperative Extension, running their consumer horticulture program, started the Master Gardener program in Orange County, New York. After 16 and a half years, went to Mohunk Mountain House, and I was their superintendent of parks and grounds, in charge of the outside of the house.
It sounds like you weren't doing organic gardening at that point.
Not organic gardening at that point. So I've been here since January of 2013. I'm in charge of the Renaissance Collection, which is a collection of plants that do well in Sullivan County.
Okay, I'm going to get down to the nitty-gritty of the home gardener who's going out to shop for plants and seeds. And the first thing that happens is if you're online, the nurseries ask you what growing zone you're in. How are those zones determined, and which zones are we in?
I can just tell you about my first day at work. I drove from Liberty where it was raining and headed to Hankins where it was snowing. So I said, well, we must be at no higher elevation. I must be going towards zone 4 probably. And then in Wurtsboro, it's going to be a little bit warmer, more like 5B, almost zone 6. And you know it as soon as you go over the Bashakill and down, you can see a change in how more advanced the trees are right now and that you're going into a warmer climate. But the one thing also we have to think about, Stephanie, is not only these cold zones that we talk about, but as we move into the future, we're going to look at heat zones as well, which is another thing that Dr. Cathay has come up with. And I know when I lived in Philadelphia, the summers were very hot, and there's so many things we can't grow, like lupins. Lupins grow beautifully in Sullivan County. So those warmer temperatures in the evening in the summer have an effect on our crops and on our plants as well.
I actually went out and took a picture to post on Facebook when the thermometer went down to minus 15.
Yes.
And I have to say that I was kind of happy about it because I think it kills the woolly adelgid that prey on our hemlocks here.
Yes, they have found that the cold weather can knock down their populations, so that's a good thing.
Can you tell us about the Sullivan Renaissance Collection? I know that's a point of pride with you, and you have to figure out what kind of plants are likely to do well around here to put in that collection.
Yes, that's true. And we are trying to focus on plants that need low water needs, deer, I won't say resistant, nothing is deer resistant, deer tolerant. We also want to look at if they grow in the sun or shade. We also want to see if they are pollinator friendly. So this year we've come up with a collection. We're introducing more pollinators to it because of the plight of our honeybees and our monarch butterflies. So we meet with the garden centers in the fall and we ask them what is selling. What do people want? What does not get returned because it died and they want their money back? What is your best seller? What are people growing, and what do you think we should suggest for the collection? Last year we shook the collection up and we shook some plants out of it and added new. It's a collection that I inherited. It started in 2012 and I think it's getting better all the time. We're also focusing on second homeowners because it's not just people that live in Sullivan County, but they may come up for the summer and they may want flowers. They may want gardens, but they're only here for the weekend. So if we can find some plants that have low water needs that can get established, that they can have some beauty in their yards and enjoy, it might be a good thing.
I'm kind of surprised about the criterion of low water needs because some of the Catskills is watershed area. We get a lot of rainfall here.
We can, but look at the month of April that we just had, and we didn't. I think with climate change, we have to rethink that, and we have to be prepared if we do get a drought. I think we're going to have very erratic weather as we move into the future. So get your rain barrels ready, listeners.
Can we talk a little about specific kinds of areas of the garden? What about sunny areas? What plants do you recommend? And I want to be specific so we know what to go out and buy. If you have a sunny area, which often means that it gets warm and that it does dry out quickly.
Okay, first of all, let me refer to the Renaissance collection because we do have merchants in the county who are selling the collection, and those that have a grant from Sullivan Renaissance actually get a percentage off when they purchase from them. So when we look at this year's introductions, we have garden phlox, which is a great butterfly magnet. Black-eyed Susans bloom for a long time in the summer, and they are native. Another long-blooming perennial is Geranium roseanne and many of the cranesbill geraniums. Just terrific perennials. One of my favorites is Joe Pye weed. I love it because it blooms in midsummer. You can get a tall one, or there's Little Joe, who grows shorter. Of course, the cone flowers are great plants, not only for the pollinating insects, but for birds later in the season. They go after the seeds in the cones. And sneezeweed, or helenium, which blooms for a very long time in August. For ground covers, you might want to consider lamium. It has a terrible name, dead nettle. It sounds kind of negative, but it's a beautiful, positive plant. Those are great plants that I think most people would be successful with. They don't require too much maintenance, and they're sure to come back every year. We have some shrubs in the collection, too. The hydrangea is a great plant. It likes morning sun, afternoon shade, so you can cite that for the full sun that you talked about. And Rose of Sharon, of course, likes the full sun.
Some of the plants that you mentioned would be growing from seed. I'm familiar. I have black-eyed Susan, and it self-seeds. I wonder about it. Does it need a bit of cold before it'll germinate?
A lot of plants do need that cold stratification. So if you want to start from seed, you can attempt to put some out in spring. Sometimes people are also more successful if they plant the seeds in the fall, as if they would automatically fall off the plant and then let them come up the next spring. Then they would get that next winter's cold stratification.
The seed packets don't always tell you that you need to make that period of cold for your seeds, and I've had some real flops because I didn't know about that.
Yeah. So it's always good to read up. If you're going to be a seed starter, definitely read up and see if it needs it or not. And there are some great books on the market that will help you, particularly with perennial seeds. So look it up. Do your homework.
I actually was surprised, and maybe you can give me some advice on this, is I got some, I guess called butterfly weed, and it makes a pretty orange flower.
Yeah.
And the package said not just to put it in the refrigerator, but to put it in dirt in the refrigerator. Does that make a difference?
Not that I ever heard of. So maybe that's just one way that they were successful doing it. But they don't really form roots until they are in the ground and have some moisture. So I'm not sure about that soil around the seeds.
Yeah, I wasn't real thrilled about the idea of putting dirt in the refrigerator.
Right.
Can you describe some of the plants that you talked about here, some of the most popular ones, what they look like, how tall they get?
Well, sure. We talked a little bit about annuals, and most of the annuals in our collection that we start from the ground, or that would be in containers or hanging baskets, those low ones that will grow maybe 6 to 12 inches tall would be your petunias, maybe alyssum, the pretty white sweet alyssum. The zinnias get a little bit taller, and so do the dahlias. And we're suggesting some of what we call seed dahlias, Figaro, and the harlequin mix. And then as we start to get a little bit taller, one that the deer don't particularly like to the end of the season is the dragon wing begonias. They're taller and they're very impressive. Let's see, one that spreads out beautifully as an annual. Last year it was planted in front of Bethel Woods, in front of the museum, and that is scavola or fanflower. It can go in a container or in the ground. And now there's interesting new annual grasses that can get pretty tall, 2 to 3 feet tall. The red fountain grasses. And those can really take your container from the summer into the fall. And once you pull your annuals out that have been hit by frost, you could put some pumpkins into the container, and maybe you want to plant a kale or a cabbage that could be edible for you, and you can have something that's stunning as well as beautiful, and you can eat it.
I don't see cosmos on your list. I've always had a lot of success with that, and I believe is a wildflower in some places.
Cosmos will reseed. The problem sometimes with some reseeding annuals is they just keep seeding and there's no one to nurture them. They can go into sidewalks and into places that you're not caring for. One of them is spider flower, which is late to come up in spring, and we do have one in our collection, but it's a sterile variety that does not set viable seeds.
You mentioned that you're focusing on pollinators this year. Could you name some of those? Which plants are very good for our bees?
Oh, sure, absolutely. We met with the National Park Service last fall in preparation for their anniversary this year, and they have a lot of programs both last summer and this summer with pollinators. They're putting some gardens in, so they wanted to meet with us to talk about how we could partner. And one way we promised them is that we would have some pollinators in our collection, particularly for the last long flight of those monarchs to Mexico. So the New York and New England aster is one that we've added to the collection for this year. But for midsummer, I had already mentioned the phlox, which is wonderful and does a great job as being a pollinator. So those two in particular, I think most people should put in their gardens because they're beautiful.
I read recently that dandelions are good for bees. I'm not real happy about having them, but I kind of have an excuse now.
Yeah, well, it's an early spring blooming flower, and so the honeybees come out and they're so excited about getting them. You can eat dandelion leaves and you can make wine from the flowers, so they do have their assets, and I would say that allow the honeybees to get the pollen that they want, but maybe when they're going to turn to seeds, then you could pull their little heads off. So you don't have too many.
With pleasure.
Yes.
You mentioned also that you're trying to find plants that do well in dry areas, and a lot of our areas are far away from a spigot. Which plants would you recommend for that situation?
Okay, well, first of all plants need to get established. So gardeners heed this, that in the first year that you're trying to put a garden in, particularly with trees and shrubs and perennials, you need an inch of water a week. And if you don't get it, you should supplement. So if you don't have a rain gauge, you can buy an official rain gauge or just a Campbell soup can or any kind of can will work and put it out in an open area, not underneath trees or anything that would stop the rainwater from coming in, and measure to see how much rain you actually got where you live. Because I live in Neversink, but I'm not going to have the same rain that Wurtsboro or Roscoe may get. So you can't go by what you hear on the radio. But you want to have an inch of water a week the first year. Second year, you want an inch of water every 2 weeks. And then the third year, an inch of water every 3 weeks. And at that point, your plants are pretty much established. And even if we had, quote, an extended drought, they should make it through.
I want to go to the opposite extreme. What if you have a soggy area that isn't well drained? What plants would you grow there?
Well, then you want to look at what we would call our rain garden plants. Okay, so you want to make sure that, first of all, if you're going with trees, you want to make sure that you have something like river birch or red maple, because those are trees that could get wet and then very dry if it dries out. And then if you want to look at some shrubs, one of my favorite is aronia or choke cherry. Brilliantissima is a pretty one that turns red in the fall. We'd much rather see that red in the fall than burning bush, which is very invasive. And then if we want to go more into plants that are perennials, there's really a slew of different plants that you could choose. Anything from the Joe Pye weed that I mentioned earlier is a wonderful plant. Will do fine in that situation. Buttonbush will do well. Witch hazels if you want to grow trees. Now, if you want to put any kind of plants in, one thing that does well, it's not flowering. It does have a flower, but it doesn't look like it, but it's the sedges. And they're wonderful for holding the soil, and they're just terrific plants. I would also, in a wet area, look at some natives, depending on how wet it is, maybe marsh marigold, if you could get those. They're terrific.
I think some kinds of irises do well, even on the edges of ponds where they get swamped out sometimes.
Yeah, you could do. The blue flag iris is a terrific native iris that I would definitely stick with. And oh gosh, there's so many to choose from. I don't even know where to start.
There's a yellow iris that I think is a European native.
Oh, yeah, that can really get out of hand and become invasive. That Japanese iris, and that's starting to choke out. So I probably wouldn't go there with it.
This week's guest on Farm and Country has been Diana Weiner, Horticulture Coordinator for Sullivan Renaissance. And this has been Stephanie Phillips, who's about to click on www.sullivanrenaissance.org to see pictures of all the wonderful plants that she talked about today.